Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're talking how we built config as code. So let's start with a little bit of housekeeping today. There'll be no requirement to record today's session. We will be emailing you generally the Monday afterwards with a link to the recording and all the resources in today's webinar. There will be time for questions at the end of today's session. What we prefer is if you use Zoom Q&A for the questions. Please don't use Zoom chat. Often the questions can get lost, and our preference is to use Zoom Q&A. If you're on YouTube, we will monitor the YouTube channel. What you can also do is you can also join our community Slack on octopus.com/Slack, and if you put your questions into the webinar channel. Okay, so today I'm joined by Mr. Michael Richardson. And here he is. Hey, Michael, how are you today?
Hello, Derek. I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to be joining you via the magic of the internet. You in Scotland and me here in Brisbane.
And unfortunately, as what always happens, you have drawn the short end of the stick. But when you're holding the stick like I am, obviously you always get the good bit. So tell us a little bit about your role at Octopus, Michael.
So I'm a product manager. My role is director of product. And to give the short version, I guess I spend my days listening to customers' problems and hopefully figuring out solutions to them.
And in today's session, we're going to be talking about one of those solutions, and we're going to be talking about config as code, Michael.
Indeed. I'm pretty excited to talk about this.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a game changer. I think it's a really key feature. And so what we're going to be talking about today with Michael is why config as code. You know, what we want to do is understand why Octopus has chosen to do it now. How did we deliver config as code? And then from there, we're going to share some of the lessons learned along the way for all the engineers out there. We'll provide some information on how you can provide feedback. And one just last thing is we'll provide, or we'll try to provide what our roadmap looks like for config as code going future. And then, like I said earlier on, at that point, we are then going to jump into Q&A. We should have 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll put those questions to Michael, and we can all make him squirm in his seat.
So we're going to go behind the curtain a little bit?
Yes, and I love these webinars. I think they add a lot of value because, you know, I think we work out, you know, fairly out in the open, Michael. It is nice to kind of show people you're working, I think, sometimes. Okay, so discussion time. So let's jump in. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and I'm going to ask Michael some questions. So let's jump in then. So, Michael, let's jump in with the most obvious question. What is config as code?
Feels like a good place to start, right?
Yes.
So I think when we're talking about config as code, and the way it's typically used in similar tools as well, we're talking about taking configuration that was stored in a database, and so was only accessible via the web UI or HTTP, and representing that as a text file, which can be stored in version control alongside application code. And I think this is even broader than that. This is about taking the tools and processes that developers are familiar with working with and wanting to apply that as much as possible across everything. And everywhere I said version control just then, you can pretty much substitute that with Git because, let's face it, the version control wars were fought and won at this point. So, yeah.
And there's me thinking we're going to bring back SourceSafe. So
not
really,
with this one.
No, I'll get there. I'll get there eventually. So obviously that's the thing. I think. So what's that concept with Octopus? You know, there was something around. You could actually store your deployment process as code beforehand. However, that wasn't fully featured. You know, obviously what you could do before was actually have scripts source controlled in GitHub, and then put them into your deployment process as code. So that was the closest thing that we've ever had with config as code.
Yeah, there have been a few approaches that have flown around over the years. Another one was our Terraform provider. That's another, what I would class as way of representing configuration as code. The downside or the drawback of all of those existing approaches was that you were always working on conceptually a single instance of the deployment process in Octopus. Because Octopus itself had no knowledge of branches, even if you ran those Terraform files or the scripts, you were always modifying the single version of the deployment process. And this was a real drawback. So, I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but the key difference with this approach is, I guess it's native config as code. So Octopus is now branch aware. It understands that there can be multiple versions of your deployment process living on different branches in Git.
Awesome. So the next logical question is, what made us build it, and why did we build it now, Michael?
The short answer to why did we build it is because people asked for it, and that sounds pretty simplistic. But over the years, we kind of saw it go from being a this would be nice type of feature request and just gradually build in volume to a crescendo of, no, this is really, really important to us. We must have this. And so, to break the product management fourth wall a little bit, often when we're deciding which features to build it, we kind of talk about things like, does this appeal to existing users or does it potentially attract new ones? With this, it was everyone asking for it. So all existing Octopus users, it was a really highly requested feature. It easily became our most requested item. And it was the same thing when demoing Octopus to potential new users as well. It was always high on the list of questions. Can we version control the configuration for this? And I guess the other thing that we consider, I guess, when deciding what to build is would we use it? And the answer for us was absolutely yes as well. I mean, we're a development team too, and we like to apply those development processes, basically to version control whatever we can as well. So yeah, it was time.
Awesome. So obviously, tell us a little bit about the journey. So obviously we decided it was time. We're about to release it in early access. Give us that journey.
Journey is the right word here. Maybe Odyssey is better. So this journey probably started back in early 2020, I guess, was the moment that we decided to turn the first earth or write the first code. And we knew with this feature, we knew it wasn't going to be easy to build. There were a lot of unknowns for us, both in how we would engineer this, also how we wanted it to work. There were many different approaches we could have taken to building this. Essentially, we wanted to start by removing some unknowns. And we felt like the best way to do that initially was to build a proof of concept. So we took a few of the opinions that we had about the feature and we built them in 6 weeks. We built an initial cut. It was rough and ready, and it was designed to be throwaway from the start. So that was really successful. And to be honest, in my time at Octopus, this is probably the only time I can remember us building a throwaway proof of concept on a feature of this kind of scale. That let us validate some engineering assumptions that we could build it. It let us validate some of the opinions that we had about how the feature should work. We went, yeah, this actually works the way we hope. And so then we started to build it for real. And we did that. We worked on it for maybe nearly a year, maybe not quite, but it was for quite a while. Essentially, we got towards the end of that and our engineering team pretty much said, look, we've learned a lot along the way of this journey and we want to change some of these things before we even ship it for the first time. Basically, we want a V2 right out of the gate. And the reason for that was we didn't feel like we could support what we had in production. I'll talk a little bit about a few of the specifics there. So in terms of the way we interacted with Git, we originally wrapped around the Git command line because that was, we kind of felt the most pragmatic choice initially. That, as you can probably imagine, came with a lot of drawbacks, not just for performance reasons, but also for actually shipping it. And just the interop between the command line and the code base. We threw that away and went with a libgit-based solution. So the libgit sharp library wraps that. But also, you know the old cliche about everyone engineers their application to replace their database layer, but no one ever does. Well, with this feature, we pretty much have, except we haven't replaced the existing database layer. We've got another one beside it now. And it's even harder than that, because it's not like swapping out a relational database for another relational database. It's swapping out a relational database for a persistence mechanism with a whole bunch of different assumptions. Like there's no foreign keys, there's no single version of things, because you can have multiple branches. So hopefully, you can start to put yourself in the mind of what that code might look like. And I guess we wanted to take the learnings over those months of development and redo some of the abstractions around that to take advantage of the things that we've learned. So, we've got these concept of document stores now that can be either database or Git aware. And yeah, basically just re-engineer it with the learning. So you could think of the version that we've currently built of this that we're rolling out right now as really the V3 of the application at this point. And so the stage of the journey we're at now is the actual feature is now shipped. It's live in all of our Octopus Cloud instances. It's currently turned off, hidden behind a feature flag. We've got it enabled in our internal instances. So I guess we're in the dog fooding phase of the development. And yeah, we've learned a lot along the way from building that. Turns out that when you lose things like foreign keys in a database, it really changes the way that you have to build things. It changes some of the core assumptions of the application, and it's been a journey.
It's funny you should say that. Obviously, I've had access to it. I was playing with it last November, and I remember at the time I was actually using HCL as part of that. Obviously, that's now changed. So with that, one of the things, and obviously not everyone's going to be aware of that, what design decisions were taken along the way, and can you share, like for instance, the language selection? What does that look like, and how did we get there?
Yeah, so before we get to the language choice, because that one is fun to talk about, a few of the other, I guess, key design opinions that we really wanted to stick to was one that was important to us was that we didn't want to force a choice on users to choose between the Octopus UI or a source-controlled implementation. Over the years when people would ask us for this feature, we kind of had a common list of questions that we would ask in response. And one of them was always, would you be willing to give up the Octopus UI in order to have a source representation? And the answer was kind of always, do we have to choose? And we'd played with a lot of other tools in designing this feature, and it always just felt like such a terrible choice to have to make as a user, especially if you had to make it not at a user level, but at a project level, which is often the way it works. So we wanted to offer both the Octopus UI and the source code representation of it, not one or the other. That was a pretty key design opinion that we wanted to stick to. Would have made it a lot easier to build if we didn't, but that's a common theme here. Another design opinion that we had was if we were going to do this, we wanted to expose the power of Git. So, there were many different ways we could have built it, and many of them would have been easier, but Git and branches are almost synonymous at this point. And one of the first things you'll notice when you use the feature in the application is there's a giant branch which are on your deployment process now. So you can actually change to a different branch in the Octopus UI and work on that branch. And then when you go to create a release, you can choose the branch that you create the release from. And just exposing that power of Git in the UI, again, it wasn't something that we wanted to do a light version of, if you like. The third one I'll talk about quickly is this idea of, I guess, feature parity. And again, this is about we really didn't want to force users to make bad choices. And we didn't want you to have to choose between either having a version controlled project but losing most of the Octopus features, or having all the features but not having a version control project. It just feels like such a, again, terrible choice as a user. And again, it would have made it much easier to build if we hadn't just stripped all the features away and started from scratch. But then we really didn't want to be in an arms race with ourselves either, of trying to build those features into the version control projects while new ones were being added. So basically, wherever possible, all the features work in version controlled projects. So really, the idea of not having to make compromises to use version control was really important to us. But should we talk a little bit about the language choice?
Let's. It's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, so again, those questions, when we were asked as a feature request for this, one of the questions on the list was always, so which configuration language should we use? And the takeaway, I guess, of that, the summary of that information is everyone hates all of them. And we had to accept pretty early on that whichever one we chose, we were going to disappoint some people. And that was fine. We can live with that. So, the obvious choices, let's run through them a little bit. So, I mean, the easiest choice from an implementation point of view for us would have been to use JSON as the configuration language, because we already persist a lot of things to JSON inside the SQL database. However, JSON's a great language for representing serialized objects. Brilliant. It's not really designed for representing documents, because our key thing here was readability. These files get read far more often than they get written, and JSON, in our opinion, sacrificed some readability there. So we sort of moved on from it as a choice, and the next really obvious consideration would have been YAML. And honestly, it wouldn't have been wrong to use it. As far as readability goes, it's really nice. It definitely can be tricky to edit. Like some of the, you are nodding in sympathy here, Derek.
Yes, I am. It's so powerful, but using it, it could be better.
Yeah, and it's excellent, I think, for trivial documents as well. For many deployment process, they're not trivial documents. They can be really quite huge, and figuring out what level of nesting you're at in them is kind of yuck. And also, we were pretty aware that these documents will be both human edited and machine edited. And again, YAML brought in some complications with that. So we kind of cast our eye a little further. Let's throw XML into the mix, because part of me would have loved to have made the kind of contrarian play and gone with XML. Would have been fun for our marketing team, I think. But, again, for that readability, it's pretty verbose. So we looked at a language based on HashiCorp's HCL configuration language. Many of the Octopus team were already familiar with it via Terraform. And it has a lot of nice properties. It's designed for this sort of task. It's what it's built for. We think it's pretty human readable, and we think it's pretty nice to edit as well. And at the end of the day, it pretty much came down to us polling our own development team and saying, which of these languages would you want to work with? And yeah, it was a pretty close run thing between a HCL based language or YAML. But yeah, we went with what we're calling OCL, Octopus Configuration Language.
Awesome. It's really good, because that's the thing. I think for me, I can understand YAML. The thing I love, obviously, I've mentioned my opinion on YAML quite a few times, and I love how powerful and reusable it is, and how I can port it around and generally reuse it. Obviously, I'm reusing the fact I said reusability. However, I think I love it, but at the same time is I absolutely hate using it. Obviously, but the end result is undeniably very powerful.
And readable.
So that's it, right? Because that's the thing is, I'm not from a development background, so I spend way more time reading code than I do writing it. And when I do write it, it's probably not that readable. However, it does do it. So can you share any information on Octopus configuration language and how it all works?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, Derek, you made a really interesting point there, though. Like you declared yourself not a developer, and therefore, don't like writing it a whole lot. I would argue that that's true of everyone. I don't think many people sit down from scratch and write these configuration documents, no matter what the language is, whether it's a CloudFormation template or a Terraform file or...
I pretty much always start from something else. It's the first thing I do. I normally Google something and someone has started something and I'll maybe remove like 60% of it and then kind of move on from there.
Yeah, which again is why it was so important for us to keep the UI as well, because, that having version control configuration is really powerful. Staring at an empty text document, it just isn't. And another key takeaway we had with all of this was that to a large extent, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, the configuration language used. I suspect a lot of people may disagree with that statement, but most of the benefits come regardless of assuming it's not a terrible format, it's, as long as it's readable and it's version controlled.
I think that's the thing. I think it's key that it's readable and easy to write, and because that's the thing is like that. For instance, obviously, like you said, I'm not a developer, so that doesn't mean obviously I'm not comfortable going in and making minor edits. So like that, sometimes like that, I would jump into that. But for the most part, I would see myself continuing using the UI over that command line. But at the same time, is if you're constantly spinning up new projects, I could see there's a lot of really great use cases there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't answer your question before. OCL. So yeah, OCL definitely takes a lot of inspiration from HashiCorp's HCL. The reason we called it OCL is, we've got our own custom implementation, our own serializer and parser, and there's nothing tying it to HashiCorp's implementation. In fact, HCL's already on a V2 that's got some new constructs in it, like I think if statements and iterators, but that we don't think at this stage make a lot of sense in deployment processes. So I guess to some extent the two are forked, and there's nothing stopping us from diverging further in the future. I was interested to see somewhat recently Azure's new configuration language, Bicep, I believe they've called it, is a very HCL looking language as well. And yeah, it was a nice validation.
I think, to be honest, obviously I'm a Azure solution architect and all that sort of good stuff. The thing is like ARM, no one is having a good time with ARM. So the thing is infrastructure and just generally anything needs to be a little bit easier. Bicep is so much easier to write than something like ARM, which is JSON based. So no one's really having a good time. To be honest, I love Azure. JSON makes me, I'd say, pull my hair out, but so yeah, it is. But that's the thing, though, and I'm really interested because when using OCL, I found it quite easy to write, which is really good. So another question, just to put you in the hot seat. Obviously, there are other tools out there that do similar things to Octopus. How does our implementation of config as code? How does that compare? And do you feel that we have got an advantage over other tools? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess so let's be honest here. We're not exactly early to the game with implementing config as code feature. Many tools in the ecosystem have some way of version controlling their configuration, which gives us a really great chance to play with those first and see what makes for a great user experience and what doesn't. And we've done that over the years, and specifically when building this feature. And I guess what we found was that tools kind of sat on a spectrum with the approaches that they took. At one end of the spectrum, you've got, I guess, the idea that you kind of use Git almost as a sync mechanism. So you make changes in the application, they get pushed, sometimes even only one way, so it doesn't read back from Git, it just pushes them into Git, and that's it. I guess you can think of it as using it as an audit log almost. We'll call that like the Git Lite kind of end of the spectrum. And going through that, then you might have implementations that read and write from the Git source, but still they don't expose any concepts of branches or anything in the application. If we move right down to the other end of the spectrum, where I guess it's kind of all in on the config as code, this idea that who even needs a UI? You're just you're in config as code land now, so it's very Git native because it's just a text file, and so I think we kind of went for the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold here. We really wanted the full power of Git. We really didn't want to give up all the goodness of the Octopus UI, and we thought that would bring the best user experience. It definitely made it the trickiest to build, and having gone through this journey, can absolutely see why different tools take all these different varying approaches to it. I guess I'll contrast with one specifically. One tool that we're fans of at Octopus and have used quite a bit is Azure DevOps. So the approach that they took with their YAML pipelines was they were a new type of pipeline, and they went very much at the all-in end of the spectrum. You were editing YAML files, you could definitely switch branches on them, and they stripped away a lot of the functionality from the release pipelines, certainly initially, to build those. So they went right back to, I guess, basics and put it in source control. Totally, they don't need my approval, but totally valid approach. We also had the luxury of seeing where that ended up, and it did end up with having the two different project types to choose from. They, to this day, still quite haven't been reconciled. You're very much editing YAML in the UI with the implementation. So I guess our approach, we strive to expose the power of Git wherever possible. You can switch branches in the UI. If you want to edit Git, full ability to do so. If you want to crack open VS Code and make changes in it that way, Octopus will scoop them up and read from them just like it would if you'd made them through the UI. But if you want to keep using the Octopus UI, you can also use it exactly as you would today as well, with the additional ability to switch branches and edit on different branches. So hopefully that gives some sense of where on the spectrum we fell with our implementation.
That's it. I think as well, I really like it, mostly just because I can test something really quickly. Because I don't know about you, Michael, but when I was an Octopus user, before I joined Octopus, someone would ask me to make a change to a project. I'd go in, I would probably disable 7 steps, I'd clone them, make the smallest change, and then I'd go in, and then I would, obviously I have to flick between them, and then create a new release, then do that. There was a lot of pain there, whereas now you can do that in a branch, right?
Yeah, like ignoring everything we've just spoken about with version control, this little mechanism of being able to, as you said, no longer have to make changes on the live version of the deployment process, being able to now switch to a new branch, make your changes, safely test them in a development or test environment without impacting that mainline branch. If you then have to go home for the day, you don't have to worry about getting it back into a working state. You can leave it broken. From my personal experience, having used it so far, if you took all the rest of the version control away, I want this mechanism to stay regardless. It is legitimately a really significant change to the way that you can work in Octopus. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the thing is it's like I always re-enable the wrong step as well, so it just kind of avoids all that back and forth and causing issues, because more often than not, if there's a problem in Octopus, it's normally me. So yeah, it's quite funny. So we went through some of the design decisions, some of the how we landed up on Octopus configuration language. So give us your value proposition. What are the key benefits of config as code? And I think we've touched on most of them so far, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think so. But let's recap a little. So I mean, to jump right up to the top level, I think what this allows you to do is it allows you to evolve your Octopus configuration alongside your application code. Over the years, engineering teams have adopted both tools and practices of working that revolve around version control. We're talking pull requests, all those branches, all those good things. This brings that to your Octopus configuration. Specifically, we're talking initially about deployment processes. So being able to bring it into that workflow, that version-controlled workflow, is the game. That's the value proposition. The kind of side effects that flow on from that are I think the thing we just touched on earlier, the fact that you can now leverage branches to effectively have drafts of the deployment process is a really powerful addition. And then there's just, I guess, again, ignoring the version control aspect, being able to edit things in a text editor, while, as we touched on early, is probably a really bad experience if you want to start from scratch and write a whole deployment process. It's a pretty great experience if you want to make small changes, especially bulk small changes. Text editors are really well optimized for copying, find, replace, these kind of operations that are just pretty tricky to build into a UI, especially across multiple projects. So yeah, I think the combination of all the benefits of version control, the benefits of using a text editor where appropriate, combined with these powerful new branching mechanisms in Octopus, and you're getting pretty close to the value proposition of the feature.
I think as well, though, it's like you've touched on it as well. It's about really where you're more comfortable with. Like, for instance, I definitely would be most comfortable in the UI. However, that doesn't mean I can't work with David, the developer, who's more comfortable, writing out the code and configuration files.
Yeah, and this influenced our design a lot as well. Like we were talking about earlier, not wanting to throw away the UI to go all in on that text file. You raise a really good point. A key reason for that for us was because a wide range of different people use Octopus. Absolutely, development teams use it all the time, but so do QA teams to deploy changes, so do release management teams. So, everyone involved in shipping software often use Octopus in various capacities. And one of the really powerful things that I think it brought to the table originally was that idea that anyone can deploy, for example, or anyone can come in and make changes. To take all of that away felt like just a really significant step backwards, and a trade-off that we didn't want to make. But again, as we've said along the way, these design decisions, we're really happy with them and the way they've played out. But boy, did they make the feature harder to ship along the way, because instead of having that vertical slice, so there's a way of thinking sometimes when you build new features, this one was, I guess, a horizontal slice across the bottom. It kind of undercut everything existing, and it meant it was definitely a journey to build. There was no quick wins here. We had to consider how it played with various different features in Octopus. We had to build a lot of abstractions into the code base to handle both. Because I guess the other thing to hint at here as well is we're not going to force anyone to use config as code, certainly not initially. You'll be able to opt in for different projects. So for everywhere where we made changes to support persisting to a Git repository, we also still have to support reading and writing from a database as well. So in terms of engineering difficulty, we set the bar pretty high on this one, but hopefully the results are worth it.
That's it. I think obviously we've called this a journey, and then I think it's now becoming more of a saga. This is like part one. Obviously there will be part 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Obviously those are a little bit further away from us. So on that, Michael, can you just share a little bit on how it actually is supposed to be working?
Yeah, and we're going to have a webinar in the very near future where we really dive in with the demo and everything. We'll talk about that later. But so today we decided not to do that for this I guess meta webinar. But I can hand wave a little bit and talk about this, because luckily the actual surface area of the feature in terms of what faces the user isn't that big. So in Octopus, in a given project, you'll be able to go to its settings and you can point it at a Git repository. Once you do that, the Octopus project, initially the deployment process, but eventually variables and runbooks and anything else that makes sense, gets written into that Git repository onto a chosen branch. As soon as you then navigate to the deployment process editor, you'll see there's a big branch switcher at the top, very similar to what you'd see in GitHub, for example. And you can change branches and view and edit those deployment processes on whichever branch you like. And then when you go to create a release in Octopus, you can choose which branch version of the deployment process you're creating that release from. and that's what gives you that round trip to test those branches in various environments. And yeah, all the usual Octopus goodness applies alongside this. So yeah.
Awesome. So obviously we've talked about deployment process. Can you share, is it just the deployment processes contained in this version of Config as Code, or are we doing anything else?
Yeah, for initially it's the deployment process we tackled first, and we'll ship this and learn from all of your feedback about what next. But we have some pretty strong assumptions that variables and runbooks will follow immediately on the heels of it. They just make sense as well. I mean, runbooks are very similar in a sense to deployment processes and make just as much sense to be version controlled. Variables are really powerful. The idea of them in a source code representation in version control. In some ways, to me personally, the variables bring even more power than the deployment process itself does. They tend to be the things that I find myself making bulk changes across, for example. They change per environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that will be a really powerful addition, and we are pretty sure it's coming straight after.
That's nice. It's funny because variables, I can see a really useful use case, because what I find is I create the variables, then I create the deployment process, and then, it's like you've forgotten maybe a few. And I always either, put a dot in. As part of that, I'm a big fan of creating functions. So like if it's a global variable set, for instance, then it's global dot. And sometimes what I'm guilty of is forgetting where I put the dot. So actually being able to work within a single, obviously I'd imagine it'd be a couple of different fields, but at least that way then when you're working with the variable, you can also work with deployment process, and that'll probably make things a little bit easier.
Yeah, I guess the interesting challenge for us with variables is the sensitive variables. No one wants their passwords written into source control, obviously. So
yes.
that in its own will probably make the topic of another webinar one day. But there's a lot of interesting approaches that we can take there.
Awesome. So we are now getting into, there's a few more questions that we're getting to, but we are kind of getting to the business end of the webinar. So we are rolling it out. Obviously, I've touched on the EAP, which is Early Access Preview. Can you take us through what the rollout looks like and when people can get it in cloud, get access to on-premises, etc.?
Yeah, the $1 million question. So technically, as I mentioned earlier, Config as Code is right now, it's been shipped to all cloud instances. It's still hidden today behind a feature flag. That tends to be how we roll things out these days. We have that feature flag enabled on all our internal projects, and we're currently testing it there. Over the next days, week or so, as soon as we're happy that it's stabilized in our internal environments, we'll toggle that feature flag, and at that point it will be available to all Octopus Cloud instances. For the initial part of the EAP, it is going to be Octopus Cloud only. So if you're self-hosted and you do want to play with it, the easiest way will be to spin up an Octopus Cloud instance if you don't already have one, and you can do that very easily from octopus.com. The reason we ship that to cloud instances first for that initial rollout is just because any issues that are encountered, it just lets us patch them and roll out any fixes to them so much earlier. That quick iteration is much easier when it's hosted by us. But as soon as that initial burst of activity slows down and we're confident the stability is up to the next level again, we'll make it available on self-hosted instances. And yeah, I guess at that point, the final part of the journey, or at least the first part of the journey of this feature, will be taking the EAP flag off. And at that point, it's very much depending on user feedback. We're shipping this as an early access. It's still definitely a discovery journey for us. We're very keen to find out, because this isn't just a hit and run feature for us. We genuinely think this is going to impact some of the kind of core paradigms, if you like, in Octopus. And so So we're very interested to hear how people want to hold it, what they want to do with it that they can't, and evolve it based on user feedback as well. So at this point, we're not 100% sure the path that will take, but yeah.
Awesome. So what I heard there was we are going live. What I think it would be good to understand, and for the people on today's webinar, is obviously cloud looks like they're going to get it, and it's going to be there very soon. Or if it's not, it's already may already be there as well. Will we do an EAP for on-premise customers, or do you think that's just going to be for cloud?
No, I think that will be the EAP as well. I hope the on-prem comes fairly quickly after cloud. As I mentioned, it's really just for that initial iteration period. It just lets us do it faster. So no, I think self-hosted will get this as well. It's as an EAP. It's worth calling out here too. Anyone who's followed the journey of this feature has probably seen us announce dates a few times and missed them. Certainly one of our learnings along the way was, when you're building a big feature like this, there were so many unknowns. To be honest, there still are. It was a mistake of us to call out the dates that we thought we'd hit. We're certainly as bad at estimating how long things take to build as anyone, probably worse.
Well, that's it. I think, but the thing is we've always been quite good about giving everyone an update. But yeah, like you say, we're pretty much now on the third, V3 of it. So that's cool.
But it is worth saying as well. We probably, if we wanted to, we could have hit those dates and shipped something. But this was always such an important feature to us that every time we would learn something new and have one of those forks in the road of, do we just get this out there and live with it, or do we take our medicine, do it right, and learn from that mistake? Yeah, we've definitely built this one for the long road, not the quick ship.
I think that's the best way to do it, though, Michael. So you're talking about feedback. How should people provide feedback? Is it email, user voice, etc.?
So there's in our community Slack, there's a Config as Code channel, which is a great place if you want to talk to us about it interactively. Also, once this feature lights up in those cloud instances, you'll see in the little orange EAP chips, those link off to feedback forms as well, which we will monitor super closely. And if you have any more, reliability-based feedback, our support channels are always there, as they always are, to give quick turnaround on any of those issues. So, yeah, I think structured feedback via that EAP form is brilliant. You want to have a conversation with us? We always love to in the community Slack, or issues via our support team.
Awesome. Right. Well, unfortunately, that's the end of my questions for you, Michael. Obviously, the future of config is in your hands, and it's also in our users' hands. So, at this point, I'm going to have a look and see if there's any questions. Okay, Michael. Not as many questions this time. There's only the 10 or thereabouts. So let's jump in. Okay, so Eric is asking, regarding conflicts, will they be dealt with mostly like template changes conflicts today?
No, a little different for the conflicts, because the conflicts we're talking about here are Git conflicts. They're anything that Git's decided that it can't merge. So the approach for handling those will be in whatever your preferred diff tool is, because as you can probably imagine, given this is source code now, it's possible to make some changes in that the Octopus UI just doesn't know how to handle. So yeah, at least in early versions, any unresolvable Git conflicts will be handled outside of Octopus as text.
Excellent. Thank you. Which version onwards can we start making use of config as code? And this is going to be a little bit difficult because there's going to be a separate EAP for on-premises and cloud. So can you cover that question?
Yeah, I hopefully that question came through just before we addressed that section. But I think the short answer there is 2021.3 will be the one for self-hosted that they'll probably see it in. Although, yeah, that may not be accurate. But cloud instances first is the answer there.
Awesome, thank you so much. So this one's a bit longer. What are the means to synchronize Git content with the Octopus DB? Is there any binary and or command line tool in charge of dumping Octo content into OCL files and the opposite? And
Ah,
would it be possible to include it in his own CI/CD pipelines?
so there's no actual sync. When you convert a project to be a version controlled project, it reads and writes directly from the Git repo at that point. So that deployment process that lives in the Git repository. So it reads and writes it live, if you like, no sync process. I hope
Excellent.
that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Michael. Just for those who are using chat for the message, I'm going to stop answering the questions in chat. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature.
I'll just before you do, Derek, I'll just follow up on Eric's question in the chat. He said, "What would an unrecognizable UI change look like?" And I guess to briefly answer that, the Octopus UI can handle certain types of errors. Like if you put in an environment that doesn't exist, for example, it'll light that up, and you can fix that via the UI. But you can probably imagine you could completely mangle that OCL file in text, and the Octopus UI just can't even read that at that point. So yeah, and we wanted to avoid rebuilding, I guess, Git tools. So we haven't built a merge tool into the Octopus UI. So I hope that adds a little information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Dan is asking, Git one version control, but are there any other tools supported for config as codes? For instance, TFVC.
No, it is Git only. You'll be able to use any Git provider you like, but Git only. No Team Foundation version control, I'm sorry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so Pete's got quite a few questions, so let's get through some of these. Can each user use their own choice of brand concurrently, or is a branch concurrently, or is a branch switch applied to all users?
Right. No, every user can work on their own branch at the same time, so that's completely concurrent.
Excellent. Auditing, Pete's asking about, what is the best practice for recording the branch that was used for an action? An audit trail in Octopus is critical for us.
Oh, that's interesting. Actually don't have a great answer for that one at the moment. I guess that's the sort of thing that we'll be really keen to hear feedback on from this initial EAP, is things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Presumably, changes made via the API appear in source as well. Do you need to pass the branch name along with the API call, or does the API user have its own branch? How do you change it?
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. Changes made via the API now get written into source control, because the Octopus UI talks via that API as well. So what we had to do is, for anything that's version controlled now, we had to add the Git ref, the branch essentially, to the route for those APIs. Yeah, so those are now version control aware, and that's meant that there are some breaking changes to the API for this. We've kept that as minimal as possible, and hopefully it's only the places that you would expect, mostly revolving around the deployment process. But yeah, if you have a setup that does rely on making changes via the API to the deployment process, then yeah, I guess you'll have to test that carefully and think about what that means in a version controlled world, because now that there's multiple branches.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, so we do still have time for questions. The last one that I've got just now is not a question, but just hearing the amount of times journey is mentioned gives me, a developer, an insight into how difficult this actually was. Cheers for taking the lumps for us, the users. Awesome. UI and code are both supported. Thank you so much, JT. That's fantastic.
Thanks, JT. Hopefully it pays off in the long run.
That's it. We've got Eric. It's popped up with script templates will be converted to OCL format also.
The step templates in Octopus will not be version controlled initially, because they sit outside of the projects. So that unit of what is version controlled is currently very much the project. The instances of those step templates inside of the deployment process are version controlled into OCL. So you'll see the parameters in there being passed through, and we'll definitely show an example of this in the next webinar where we get hands-on. But no, initially the step template source themselves are not version controlled. I can very easily imagine that will come in the future because it makes a lot of sense, but we will have to think about what that means, which repository they come from, for example.
Awesome. Okay, let's give us another 30 seconds. We do have more time for questions, so if you do have any questions for Michael about config as code, please do get them in.
There's a question from Eric again. Can we then look to refer to latest in Git? Right, this is interesting. So anytime you're editing the deployment process, you'll be on a branch. And so you'll be effectively editing the head of that branch, if you like. When you create a release, you will choose the branch that you want to create the release from, and it will snapshot that release at the commit at the time that you create the release, because that's often what you want. So I'm guessing that in your question, you're suggesting, can you then say always take the latest from a particular branch? Currently, no, but I really like this idea as well of being able to, for example, point at a script and say always run the latest version of this script for this branch. So I think that's something we'll look for. But for now, the releases are snapshotted at the commit at the time that they were created. It basically maintains the same, I guess, the same usage as today, just in a Git world.
Awesome, thank you so much. Eric's came in with it was referring to the latest step template, but he
right.
also was going to follow up with what the conflicts look like. It would also be the IO changes. Do you want to jump into that?
So the step template conflicts look the same as they do today. If you update the version of a step template in the UI, you'll still get the same display that you get today. What would conflicts look like there also with the IO changes? Yeah, so hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So Dan has asked, are there any complexities with the project export import capabilities?
Yes, there are complexities with the project export import capabilities, definitely. We aren't exactly sure today what project export import means in a VCS world, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, I guess for the EAP, for the initial cut of it, you won't be able to export config as code controlled projects. What you definitely can do, however, is copy and paste the Git representation of it into another project and point a new project at that, which isn't exactly the same thing. So this is another one of those examples where we're pretty keen to hear exactly what people want to do in this case, and yeah, hopefully figure out what the right approach here is, because you can imagine exporting, just to go into one of the complexities of this, if you export a project and that project's automatically pointing as the same repository as the previous one, that's probably not the behavior you want there. You've got two now writing to the same Git repository. So yeah, that's still something for the future.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's really good. Pete is asking, how did you decide what trigger to use to go from a change applied via the UI or API to the installation to an update of the configuration and code? Do you have a process of bundling changes in a window or applying every change individually, or perhaps a periodic change detection and application process?
No, so it's actually, there's no bundling, no windows. It's essentially Git becomes the persistent store for this. So when you go and look at the deployment process through the Octopus UI, it's reading that directly from Git. So I think that if that's the question answered there. So there's no sync mechanism. Yeah, it's effectively reading the live version from Git all the time. And when you create a release, it snapshots it at that version. So no windows, no bundling. If you make a change via source code and push it to that Git repository, the next release that comes along and is created, assuming it's from that branch, will pick up that change, guaranteed. And likewise, if you go and look at the UI, you'll see the results of that change. If you've got webhooks configured, without going into too much detail, you'll see it straight away. If not, there might be a few seconds delay, but it's effectively instant. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so there's one question outstanding. This will be the last question, unfortunately. I understand Octopus reacts to get events. Is that configurable in order to let Octopus react automatically, then the deployment is automatically launched, or sometimes to let users validate events coming in from Git through the UI, then to control deployment manually with human validation?
Right, let me just reread this.
I think that's similar to Pete's question, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think this is, if I understand this correctly, and I apologize if I don't, we're talking here about sort of triggering Octopus release creation or deployments via changes in Git. So today, there's not native behavior to do that in Octopus, but generally you can do that via whatever the Git provider you use is. For example, if you're using GitHub, you can hook up an action pretty easily to if you merge a pull request, for example, to create the release in Octopus. Certainly what we've done internally. But yeah, I think the idea of Git triggers is definitely something we'll look at in the future as well if it's requested often, which even more so than deployments, I kind of see as we get into runbooks, this is the sort of thing that might become pretty useful and requested as well. You can imagine if you've got, I don't know, Terraform files or DSL scripts or whatever it is in your repo, you might want to configure it so that if you make a change to those, a particular runbook runs and applies them to a test environment. Today, the short answer is you have to configure that from the other side to call back into Octopus to do that. Or use a schedule trigger, I guess, but that's probably not what you want in this case.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, so unfortunately, that is the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending. There's some really great questions in there. So we do have some resources that I just want to make you aware of. If you do have any problems with Octopus, please do reach out to us at support@octopus.com. If you do need some assistance with your licensing, please email us at sales@octopus.com. If you want to understand how to do something in Octopus, so for instance, how do I do X inside of Octopus, then we have a customer solutions team that you can contact them on advice@octopus.com. And lastly, we do have a YouTube channel, so you can check us out on youtube.com/Octopus Deploy. It'd be appreciated if you could subscribe to the channel and you'll be notified of all upcoming webinars and educational videos. Okay, so we're wrapping up. So thank you to everyone who attended today. Really is appreciated. Michael, thank you so much for going into all the nooks and crannies on about config as code.
Pleasure as always. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming along.
Awesome. Just one last thing. We do have some upcoming events. We're back actually on the 22nd of September. We're going to be doing a technical deep dive with Octopus config as code. That'll be myself and Michael again. We're then back on Kubernetes on the Google Cloud platform on the 6th, 7th, and 11th of October. So thank you and goodbye.